Rest with all you Canadians and Norwegians here tonight on a frozen evening on a Motzi Shabbos. We're doing the lecture series entitled Hubris and Atonement, the State of Israel and the Jewish People 1972 to 75, if I can get to 75. Tonight is the 10th lecture out of 18. First one is entitled Israel's Political Earthquake, the Fall of Golda and the Rise of Rabin. I want to start by thanking, as we always do, Shomrei Emunah and the Lehmann family for being the series sponsors. We're able to do this week after week. You know this already. Tonight I want to thank our very specific sponsors. As you can see, it's Dovid and Chanie Katz, longtime attendees, friends. It's not me. In appreciation of many history lectures you've attended, it's very kind. And also by my good friend Yisrael Markowitz. If you know, the Markowitz family in Baltimore have been here a long time, Rabbi Markowitz and his uncle, and I remember the grandfather. So again, I'm very grateful and honor Rabbi Katz as his community. Again, very kind sentiments. We're down to one half left, so that's great. So 17 half out of 18 are covered. So I need one half lecture covered, and then we're done. Then I can shut up on this business and just concentrate, as I always say, on the history side. So we're almost there. We're beginning the second half of the lecture series. It's 18, so now it's the 10th. As always, I want to thank the technical crew. Look how hard they have to work over to put everything together. They really deserve a round of applause. That's very true. It's not easy. And Bill Sachs just came in from Israel just to take care of tonight. I want to tell you right. And you have to realize he was in 95-degree weather at the Dead Sea last week, and now he came to Baltimore at 95 below zero. I mean, that's real devotion over there, okay? As a result, he's getting a raise. Yeah, that's right. But without any further ado, let's get, as always, with these kind of talks, it's long enough as it goes, so let's plunge right into it. A lot of ground to cover, as I say. Tonight is the 10th lecture about the political earthquake. We've been following the Yom Kippur War on two tracks, the military track and the track of international diplomacy and diplomatic relations. There's the general side and there's the Kissinger side, both of which were extremely important in what happens in the course of events in the War of 1973. But there was a third track, which was not supposed to be discussed in the war, but which hovered in the background and reasserted its centrality after the war concluded, and I'm talking about the Israeli politics track. Because the war was fought during an election period. You know that? The Yom Kippur War was fought during election season. That's right. Let me explain. The last Israel elections were back in '69. That was the Golda Meir elections. When she won, as you can see with the chart over here, she got 56, is that right? And this is am I reading it right, 56? And which means, by the way, that was already the Marach. So I just want to give you a framework over here. There was a time when the left altogether could go well over 61, had they wished to. When Ben Gurion started in 49, in the first elections, the Mapai had 45, the Mapam had 19. They could have put together an all-labor government, secular, non-religious, etc., of 64. That'd be absolute majority. It didn't go that way, as I've explained, and so forth and so on. They ended up, for various reasons, going Mapai with the Mizrahi party, but they could have. By the time you get to 20 years later, from 49 to 69, the demographics and the political body politic is changing somewhat, and even if you get together the Mapai plus the Mapam, which is what that was, and even the Rafi, to be perfectly honest, as all the left wing together, it's not quite 60 anymore. It's close. That's pretty impressive. It's close. But they can't get to 65, 60, all the rest of it. But that was the government of Golda Meir. And that means 69, 70, 71, 72. By 73, it's already 4 years. It's time for election. Get it? Now, that government, the Golda Meir government, had been a classic Israeli government of the old school. It's the Marach, or as we call the Mapai and associates, and the Mafta, and the religious party, the NRP, the Mizrahi party. These were the two pillars of Golda Meir's coalition. She and Chaim Moshe Shapiro, if you remember from yesteryear, who was the perennial head of the Mizrahi party. Menachem Begin, in those years, was in and out of the coalition. At the beginning, he was part, and then the Rogers plan and all that, he jumped out. This was the politics of the Golda Meir period that we talked about last year. The new elections had been scheduled for October 31, 1973, because that's 4 years since the last elections. But the outbreak of the war, on October 6th, obviously, changed that. So the elections were rescheduled for the last day of the year, December 31st, 1973. Okay, that's how they did it. So the war, therefore, is being fought, as you see, with the elections not far away at all. Although the election had been postponed, the smell of politics could not help but hover over the heads of the generals on the battlefield during Yom Kippur War, particularly in the South, as we've touched upon. I didn't go to Rachel, Beit all the details, which are ugly enough, but that's what happened. When you had, Sharon is from the Likud, and Dayan and Bar-Lev is from the, the Marach, the Labor Party, and Golda Meir, obviously, and so forth. And there is let's put it this way, if the generals during the war favor Echvei Sharon over someone else, you're making a pro-Likud statement. If you're favoring Bar-Lev over Sharon, then you're making a Marach statement. It shouldn't be politics in a war, agree? It shouldn't be politics in a war. But that was the bad timing. Now, I just told you the myth. The myth is there should be no politics in the war. There was this politics in the Israeli army. Ben Gurion used to say like this: I depoliticized the army. All the generals are Mapai. That's what. It's no politics. It's no different. It's true. That was an unwritten rule. You're not going to rise in the party. I know we have people in this audience from the old Israel. You can get nothing without a party card. Just happens to be all the chiefs of staff. There they are. Yigal Yadin and Dayan and Laskov and Svitzur and Rabin and Bar-Lev all happen to be members of the Mapai. They're just a coincidence. You see? Now, it was a nice, cozy monopoly. And if you weren't, your career was ruined. The best general of the 48 war was Yigal Allon. That's well known. But he was in the Mapai. He was in the Achdut Avodah, which is a little bit to the left of the Mapai. So he was in the wrong party, so he got canned right away as soon as the 48 war was over. And even though he would have been a brilliant chief of staff, all the rest of it, and very extremely charismatic, wrong party. So that's how it goes. Monopoly went on for a long time, all during Ben Gurion and under Eshkol, but it started to crack after the Six-Day War, but not seriously. But it started to crack as young, ambitious, retired generals, because in Israel, you retire in your 40s. Don't want to wait their turn until the Mapai gerontocracy dies out. So the classic example was Ezer Weitzman, who, if things would have been, he had no political principles except self-interest, so, which is true of most politicians. The Israelis said that. My opponent is a man of principle. His principle is self-interest. Now, wait a second. When he gets out of the army right after the Six-Day War, he'd been deputy chief of staff during the Six-Day War. He can go either way, but if he goes with the left, he's got to wait till Golda goes, then Dayan, and then Peres. On the other hand, if you go with the right, Menachem Begin, who they thought is over the hill, he's about to go. And anyway, I can push him out again there, because after all, Begin's a garnish, and I'm everything. And so he goes with the Cherut, you understand? By the time you get to the 73 war, well, we talked about the fact that Ariel Sharon definitely is not going to wait till the Mapai group waits out, because the gerontocracy actually dislikes him. Golda, even Ben Gurion, to be perfectly honest, Eshkol, they didn't like him. So when he was forced out of military command in July of 73, which is a couple months before the war, Ariel Sharon jumped into politics and created the Likud precisely in preparation for the October elections, the elections that were scheduled to be in October. So that's really, naked politics. You know what I mean? I'm joining the other party. In fact, I'm going to create the other party, which will knock you guys out of politics. My point is, without going into more sordid details, for better or worse, there are no General George Marshalls at the Israeli political system, where Marshall was absolutely apolitical, right? It was just out there to serve the country, had no political, I don't think he even voted as a matter of principle, and so forth. We don't have that in Israel. Ad hayom hazeh. There's no tradition of Cincinnatus. Remember the Romans? He was a farmer, and then they called him to be the commander-in-chief and lead Rome to victory and be the dictator for a year or two, and then he went back to the farm. Very famous. He went back to the plow, because that's over. You don't have this. George Washington is famous for being Cincinnatus, right? The war was over. Remember, he resigned the command, as we all know, in Annapolis, didn't want to be president. When he got to be president, he said 2 terms is enough. I've had it. He actually set the pattern. So that's the classic Cincinnatus thing. I'm going back to Mount Vernon, I don't have to be president for life or any of this sort of thing. And as a matter of fact, he was happy to get out. Israel, you don't have that. You get in the army, you retire when you're, let's say, 50, you want a second career, and you know what the second career is. You want to be prime minister. The Yom Kippur War, of course, exposed serious flaws in the Mapai-dominated security establishment. And the exposure, therefore, dealt a powerful blow to the Mapai's number one asset, its military reputation. That's why he got elected all the time. Mapai had led Israel to victory, even glorious victory, in 48, 56, and 67, but not in 73. And this happened at the worst possible time, Mamish Erev de Bechirot. Now, it's basic to democracy that voters express their approval or disapproval at elections. That's what they do. So the question was now, in the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War, what would happen to the Marach, the whole cup? I'm talking about the old Israel, where the opposition came from the right. The government was quote-unquote the left. The real left more or less didn't exist as a political force. The opposition was more Zionist, more to the right. If Golda loses, Nixon and Kissinger have to deal with Menachem Begin, which in my opinion and yours would have been a disaster. Kissinger was very aware of this. So in the aftermath of the war, during November, December of 73, Kissinger was careful not to act in a way that would undermine Golda and her company. Definitely Kissinger wants the Marach to win the election, and so his task is to apply pressure to Israel firmly but delicately, as he sees it. You see, it's precisely at this time, during the election, that Kissinger is meeting with Sadat, president of Egypt. They have agreed on a basic goal of IDF withdrawal from Egypt, obviously. But they also, I'm talking about Egypt on the other side, but also from more. So here is the map. Here's the Israeli army. Here's the Egyptian army. That's a crazy map. They're on our side, we're on their side, right? So it's not going to be like that. I mean, you can't have a permanent situation where they're like that, and Cairo is 40 miles away. So obviously, one idea goes like this. You go back here, and you guys go back here. The Israelis withdraw to their side, the Egyptians withdraw to their side. No, it doesn't work. Then Sadat gains 0. You understand that? What's the point of the war? You follow? So not only is it going to be that Israel is going to go back to this side, but Egypt's going to get to keep, or in some fashion, that side. Well. So, and that's how push it. Now, obviously, Golda Meir would like the next map, right? All Israel, she's not going to get that. Kissinger spends a lot of November running around from Arab capital to Arab capital, consulting with all the Arab leaders, which is a very old school Middle Eastern tactic, very sound. If you know anything about the political culture of the old Middle East, the Turkish Empire and groups like that, the way you do decisions is you do a heavy amount of schmoozing with all the players in the society, the clergy, the business leaders, you know what I mean, the soldiers, obviously, and that's sort of every interest group out there, so that everybody gets on board, and you only move when you get a consensus among these people, which is why decisions were slow in happening. So when Kissinger runs around, he wants to get everybody on board, if he can, to the basic contours of a disengagement agreement between Israel and Egypt. And you, Algeria, if we work it out, you won't scream about us, won't criticize us, and you, Morocco, and you, Tunisia, and you, Saudi Arabia, and you this, and you that, and he gets it. First of all, they like the fact that they're being consulted, because that's a Middle Eastern thing. And second of all, basically saying this, that means Israel's losing territory. That's good, you see? So he even goes, as you see, to Saudi Arabia, where he gets lectured by the king on the Jewish plot to take over the world. You understand? Now, it's a little bit interesting there. Now, meanwhile, in concluding the war, Kissinger has pulled off something unprecedented. Namely, there are direct negotiations taking place now, without Americans, between Israelis and Egyptians at kilometer 101, which is 40 miles from Cairo. Here you see that he had arranged with Sadat and Israeli generals and Egyptian ones, that's Gamasi, the commander-in-chief of Israel, this Aaron Yariv, who was a big macher in the Israeli general staff, that they're actually working out themselves in long discussion details. How to do the prisoner exchange, where exactly will your lines be. We're going to have Egyptian convoys allowed through every day to bring food to the trapped Third Army, because that was part of the deal. When, how many trucks. Point is like this, negotiations can have a dynamic of their own. If you and I meet every day and have coffee and talk about all the rest of it, it cannot help but develop a certain relationship. How far that will go, I don't know. But without that, if you don't break the ice, nothing will happen, you see? And indeed, this taka worked, as you and I know from hindsight, because it's a leap from this to the peace treaty of 1979, but it did happen, did it not? So as I said last week, we have a different perspective on it, at least I do today. So you all of a sudden have, let's go to the next one. The news is showing, this became the item on the nightly news, that the Israelis and the Egyptians actually have a place in Kilometer 101, and they have these tents and all the rest of it, and the UN is there as the official, chaperone, and they're dealing, here's the Israeli guys going off to the tent to negotiate with the Egyptians, and you see the Egyptians going over there. Because you have physical interaction on a daily basis, I repeat, on a daily basis, between the two sides, and the idea is that eases the atmosphere. Is it a guarantee that from now on everybody's going to be peace? No, of course not. But it eases it's a step, as they say before, in the right direction. Egypt and Syria have 293 Israeli prisoners of war, in addition to those that they murdered, by the way. Let's go to the next one. I want you to read this. Syria ignored the Geneva Conventions. Surprise, surprise. And many Israeli POWs were tortured or killed. Advancing Israeli forces recapturing land taken by the Syrians in the war. That was the Musa Pellet offensive that I told you, when they kicked the Assyrians out of the Golan Heights. When they did that, they came across the bodies of 28 Israeli soldiers, blindfolded with their hands behind and summarily executed. Okay? In a December speech, the defense minister stated he awarded the soldier Medal of Republic for killing 28 prisoners with an axe, chopping off the heads of 3 of them, eating the flesh of one of his victims. What kind of a country is this? Right? And then you're surprised when we read today, in 2016, 2017, that they're eating each other, chopping each other's heads off on videos in Syria. Well, that's how they do business over there. You understand? Only thing is, Israel got out, the Jews got out, so there's nobody to do it to each other. But they were doing it to us long before. The Syrians employed brutal interrogation techniques, utilizing electric shocks. A number of Israeli soldiers taken prisoner in Hermon were executed. Near the village of Chushnia, they captured 11 administrative personnel from the Golan Heights. Those Israelis who were found dead, blindfolded with heads behind their backs. 7 prisoners found dead, and others re-executed, and so on and so forth. And there's more, Some POWs reported having their fingernails ripped out, while those are described as turned into human ashtrays, as the Syrians burned them with cigarettes. A chief medical officer of the Israeli army said the vast number of Israeli POWs exposed their imprisonment to severe physical and mental torture, the usual methods of torture, beatings aimed at various parts of the body, electric shocks, wounds deliberately inflicted on the ears, burns on the legs, etc., etc. Following the conclusion of hostilities, they wouldn't give the names of the prisoners to the Red Cross, all of which is supposed to be required under the Geneva Convention. And in fact, they did not acknowledge holding any prisoners, even though they were publicly exhibited on TV crews. Syrians, having been thoroughly defeated by Israel, were attempting to use their captives as their bargaining chip. One of the most famous Israeli POWs, Lanier, was bailed out over there, and he died under interrogation when his bodies were returned at torture. It's not surprised, but I want you to know this happened. And Israel's painfully aware of this reality. And it's this atmosphere that the negotiations are taking place in late 1973 and the build-up to the war. It is what it is. That's who we deal with. It is what it is. So the Egyptians were better. Now, they killed some prisoners also, but I'm sure Israel did. That's what happens in a war. Not along the lines I just described to you, but stuff like that happens. Because they found in the bunkers, people with the Egyptian Israelis lying down with a shot in the back and all that. But the Egyptians, under Sadat, do exchange the POWs as a result of these talks at Kilometer 101. And despite setbacks, the precedent is there for negotiations, as I said. And Golda Meir can therefore, when she's running for re-election in December of 1973, point to these talks and say, we got some achievement, right? We had a bad war and all the rest of it, but now we're talking as a face-to-face negotiations. Not at a high level, but not at a low level either. So vote for me. Now, the political dirt here is always fascinating and repulsive. Would you agree with that? Politics is always fascinating and repulsive. Raise your hand if you like repulsive. No. Anyway, the big question was, would the Mapai, the Marach, survive the damage? At this point, immediately after the war, the public in Israel did not know about all the intelligence mess-ups, the terrible pshia exhibited by the entire Israeli defense establishment, both prior to as well as during the war. People were simply glad that the war was over and that Israel had not been defeated. If you were listening in Israel on the radio every day, you didn't know, maybe the Syrians were going to come to Haifa, you would just say, Baruch Hashem, it wasn't worse. Baruch Hashem, they didn't get it and conquer the whole Golan Heights. That's how people were thinking. It was evident to the voters that the world was against them in an unprecedented way, with the exception of Nixon. And they knew that Nixon likes Golda. The Marach was still able to retain its image as the only regime that the outside world respected, as had been the case since Ben Gurion. So let's put it this way. If you're a voter in Israel in December, late 1973, he's like this, I can't vote for Begin, with Nixon, that'll be a disaster. We'll lose America too. You understand? That's a bad chemistry. And then it'll be, Israel go down the drain. Golda Meir, no, Dayan, they're well known in Washington. They have a respect. Now, Menachem Begin led a new party called the Likud, as we said before, which was his old party plus new parts, which was set up by a bunch of cynical barracudas who were plotting to get rid of the Altakaker. That's what it was, right? So you have Ezer Weitzman, the general, and Ariel Sharon. I'll tell you again, it's pure politics. They're figuring, build a big party, use Begin as a public figure, then once he's in, stab him in the back, push him to the side, elect the president of Israel, something like that, they'll take over. But the old man was actually able to best him in the end, as you and I know. Didn't quite work out that way. You see, politicians like Sharon and Weitzman, these other guys, they cynical about it, they could not comprehend Begin's charisma among the voters. They couldn't match it, for sure. The voters always voted for Begin, even though they had contempt for the Likud. You understand? I'm serious. What's in the Likud? From then till today is a bunch of cynical office holders. You get it? Matter of fact, if anybody knows the Israeli politics, a few faces I see, follow the Israeli politics closely. I remember 20 years ago, they had a Likud convention, and the guy said, Mazeh, Sheila Shal Kisaot? What is it? The whole party exists just for occupying offices? Cain! You understand? Meaning, their principle is self-interest. So, it's one thing if you have a leader, you might vote for that, but not the chief. Yes, the Indians were no good. Now, it's a psychological fact that it takes time for people to absorb and process information that leads to a redirection. And this is certainly true in politics. Meanwhile, while all this was happening, this packed time, the Geneva Conference was held in December of 73. As I told you last week, nothing happened there. But the Arabs and company demanded that the PLO be invited to participate, implying that the conference would deal not only with the Sinai Desert and not only with the Golan Heights, but also with the West Bank to go back and make a Palestinian state. Nixon was not opposed to bringing in a Palestinian delegation or something like that to deal with the West Bank, especially when thanks to the Saudi Arabia oil pressure, that they were pushing this real hard. This is understandable. Golda Meir said, no way. This is about the Sinai Desert maybe. When we get to Assad, we'll deal with that. But the Palestinians, no. Nixon was angry. Moody sent a threatening letter. Look at this. This is where we went to Golda Meir. I want to say to you in all solemnity, if Israel now fails to take a favorable decision, participate in the conference on the basis of the letter we worked out, which means including the Palestinians, this will not be understood in the U.S. or in the world, and I will not be able to justify the support which I have consistently rendered in our mutual interest to your government. Interesting. But Golda Meir was tough, and she wrote back a letter basically, no. Okay? This is not something I'm going to give one. It's interesting. So she called it, thank God it was a bluff, but she called it a bluff. Now, Menachem Begin, in the election campaign, understandably, tries to exploit the Mechtal, as you'll see in a second, with limited success. He gained a lot in this election. Went if you know the history of Begin, he had 14 and then 8 and then 15 and 17 and 17. And then when he joined another party, it was 25, 26. And it was very low numbers. And then when the election happens in December 31st, he's going to get 39, which is usually 4, but it's not enough, okay? But he pushed it, because it's politics, he pushed it for all it's worth, and you hear in a speech, some of you will understand it in Hebrew, when he said, the public is asking, why didn't we mobilize in time? We made a terrible mistake, and lives were lost, and all the rest of it, and Golda Meir and Daya have to sit through this, because this is a speech in the Knesset. Here, take a look at this. We didn't mobilize in time.
בסוף דצמבר התקיימו הבחירות שנדחו בשל פרוץ המלחמה. אלה היו בחירות במדים. הציבור הישראלי היה עדיין נבוך.
So, hear what he said. He said, we went through the first 48 hours of terrible losses because we didn't mobilize now, which is true. But that's called sticking the knife in. Now, but that's what you do in, that's what you do in politics. Now, let's put it this way. He's not the only politician. Golda Meir knows how to campaign. She goes out among the troops. And she takes Q&A, and she schmoozes with everybody. Here, take a look at this. Is Golda flying in? Talking to the soldiers. We don't need all the territory, but we need it for defense. Right? So in other words, she went and campaigned and told her soldiers. Matter of fact, that's only a part of it. I'll show you another thing where it's a long piece, but I only give you a part of it, where she's mommy schmoozing with the soldiers, and a guy wants to give her some coffee, and she says, no, well, how about tea? Okay, I'll take tea, you know. Here, take a look at this. The guy wants to give. Let's give her tea. She flies from command to command. They hate each other. They all want to get autographs. So charismatic she was. She says, I got to sit in the same seat with that guy. I would like your job. That's what he's saying. Okay. This is what you call a visit to the front, which is completely apolitical, right? It's no political thing whatsoever. That's how it goes. Now, she won, meaning when the elections came December 31st, so she went down from 56 to 51. That's the whole left. That's the Mapai, it's the Marak. So it's Mapai, Mapam, this group, Rafi, all together. At 51, Begin went to 39. So it's a big closing the gap, but it's nowhere near. She still commanded a decisive majority, agreed? But how do you make 51 into 61? Not so simple. She's going to have to go with these guys, with the Mizrahi again. It's the old map. Doesn't work any other way, agreed? There's the map. If you get this, now, maybe him, but she'd rather not have Begin. 61 is very narrow. But maybe you can add, this is how it goes in Israel. First of all, this doesn't really count. This is a satellite parties of the Arabs. These are, the Arabs who were in the Mapai. So you have an extra 2 or 3 to play with or something like that. That's how it goes, my friends. So the bottom line is, she was able to hold on, but it's a new political landscape. The left was weakened. Golda Meir was weakened. They can put together a majority, but with difficulty. It's the last hurrah, what you see here, of the Mapai Old Guard. This is the last time. Golda Meir stays on. Same names, Sapir as the finance minister, Moshe Dayan, Yigal Alon, Abiban, the whole company. She forms the same government, only one new face, and that's Yitzhak Rabin. But that will be a significant new face. The public still feels that the Marach has the necessary experience. That's why they voted for him. They're the ones that have the experience. Although the recent fatal errors had resulted in so many casualties. And so maybe, as Mark Twain said, sometimes experience is overrated. Good judgment is the result of experience, and experience is the result of bad judgment. You agree with that? Now, that's what it is. So it's back to the Mafdal and the Marach, as I said before. The new government of Golda Meir, now at the very beginning, January 1, so to speak, of 74, has 2 immediate challenges and a bunch of other ones behind that. One is an agreement with Egypt, and one is an agreement with Syria. I got to disentangle those troops because it's a mess. You can't leave the map the way it is. Look, the Israeli army is stuck in Egypt somewhere. Here, they're down here. You can't leave it like that. So you have to figure some way around. As the new government is being rapidly formed with the same people, basically, Kissinger arrives and begins his shuttle. This how it became famous. In early January, you fly back and forth with the press in tow. And it's not far. So you can go Cairo in the morning, Yerushalayim in the afternoon, Cairo back the next day, back and forth. The goal is disengagement. Now you understand from the map what I mean. You have to get the Israeli army out and far away on its side and the Egyptian on its side. From a Kissinger point of view, this makes sense. But from a gut view, an atavistic point of view, Israel feels terrible. Golda asserts correctly that if the Arabs started the war and in the final outcome Israel loses territory, it's only going to encourage further wars by larger numbers of Arabs and Muslim assailants because the war was successful. But Kissinger counter-argues, correctly also, that the Arabs aren't going to go to war so soon. They've been pretty badly mauled by the fighting. And so this is the right move to go, to give up some territory to disengage. The rhythm, Kissinger says, has to change to one of negotiations. And back and forth and forth and back. They're hocking here. I'm condensing into 2 minutes, hours and hours, days and nights of, Kissinger on one side and all the Israeli leadership on the other side, back and forth. But these are the basic arguments. Now, you'd think that there are 2 trains talking past each other, but not exactly. Moshe Dayan is the middle. And he's the one who figures out these disengagement plans where Israel will be here and there'll be a buffer zone there. He's the one who comes up with all the new ideas. And as a result, Kissinger shuttles back and forth from Cairo to Tel Aviv with the world press in tow and successfully negotiates the first official disengagement agreement in the Sinai as the first real agreement treaty between Israel and an Arab opponent, period. And here are the outlines, okay? Look over here. The Egyptians get back all the stuff Israel pulls out of this side. Israel pulls out of all this side. So notice, not only did they not get back what the Egyptians took, but they had to give up a little bit. In the middle is a buffer zone. That's the UN. And then here's the Israeli army or something like that, right? So you see that they gave up a certain amount, but the counter side was they got an agreement, and Sadat said he's going to open the Suez Canal. Now, what's the point of that? if you're putting your country back on a full-time business basis, it's more unlikely that they're going to go to war. You get it? It's possible, but it's very unlikely. And it was considered a good faith move to show that we're committed now to negotiation as opposed to war, which, as you and I with hindsight know, did prove to be the case. The treaty's text is very simple. As you see, Egypt and Israel scrupulously observed the ceasefire, etc. Military for separate in accordance with principles. Egyptian force to the east side, deployed west of the line A. And the map that you and I just saw, Israeli forces deployed in the east of the line, and line B, in the area in the middle between the UN force, and then they'll be limited in their armament and forces. That was an important component. Egypt can put soldiers on the other side, meaning on quote unquote on our side of the canal, but a limited number, I think 30 tanks and things like that. And that way they can't do any surprise attacks, because if they start bringing up more, you can see it. You understand? And without going through the rest of it, the distancing of the armies from each other with the UN between was actually a good thing for Israel from the military point of view, because that means you can't have any surprise attacks anymore. It's more like 67. If the Arabs mobilize or something like that, they got the UN in the middle, the people are watching them, and you're not going to have an overnight surprise or anything near it. The Israelis don't see it that way. What if he cheats? You know, he pulled off a fast one on us before, on Yom Kippur. What if he does it again? They do not have the benefit, as I said before, of our hindsight. But in reality, it didn't happen. And here you have, from the news at that time, the signing of the protocol. They're announcing the disengagement agreement. These are Israeli soldiers stationed in Egypt, as you can imagine. They're going to go home. The Egyptian commander.
I hope that history may record one day that the initial step towards understanding, reconciliation, and peace in the Middle East began here at kilometer 101.
This actually happened. I mean, like I say, we have a hindsight today, benefit, and that was the beginning of reconciliation, peace, and all the rest. As good as it gets in the Middle East. I mean, you know, to peace and love ain't happening, but as good as it gets, okay? And let me say this, it's almost 45 years. Now, there are many reasons for this. It's not because the Egyptians are tzaddikim, but nevertheless, having said everything, it's 45 years almost. That's hello, Doverhoop. One important concession Israel did wring from Kissinger: no PLO. Right? These negotiations are not going to involve the Palestinians, and certainly not Arafat. No discussion about the West Bank. This is extremely important, because when he committed to this, it meant America was willing to tie its own hands as far as this is concerned. Indeed, a hallmark of Kissinger's policy is not to address the Palestinian issue. Again, we're looking back here in hindsight. It got much worse under Carter. Many forget that. When it was under Nixon and Ford and Kissinger, the Palestinians were not part of the business. It had to do with Jordan, maybe. Carter came in and messed things up. But in this time, it wasn't. The focus instead will be on state to state, on the possible. At the most, maybe what they call the Jericho plan. When Kissinger met with King Hussein, who he felt bad with, because King Hussein like this: I was a good guy, I didn't join the war, I should get something, you know? But Israel don't want to give it. And second of all, they don't have to. And Kissinger said, well, what about, just like you had in Egypt a little bit, and later in Syria a little bit, what about here a little bit? What about Jericho should be part of Jordan? Can you imagine what a mess that would be today? Oh my God. But it didn't happen. Anyway, this was the dynamics that was going on at that time. A shaken Israeli public forms for the first time in its history an anti-Kissinger, anti-withdrawal tzibur. As a result of what I just said before, even though I'm giving the dovish point of view, and I'm pointing out correctly the 45 years of peace, people did not see anything like that at that time. Well, let's put it this way. A lot of people in Israel didn't see it at that time. And that means you're creating a new political dynamic in the body politic, which has become of overwhelming importance ever since, the next 40 years. The tzibur that I'm talking about, in Israel now they call Yemani, the tzibur will in the coming decades consistently vote against the Israeli Labor Party when that party is perceived as advocating withdrawals from the West Bank. So after the Kissinger agreements, the Labor, the Mafdal, the Marach, the Mapai, all that gang, they're going to lose the elections of 77 and 81, and they won't win in 85 really, and they'll lose in 88, and they'll only come back in 92 because they think that Rabin is not going to give anything up, and of course he does give up. That's when they went to Oslo. Okay? So after that, the next election was Bibi. Then the next election, because Clinton sent his campaign manager, if you remember. So that was Barack, and that was it. Ever since then, who won the election? It's the Likud, you understand? So what's the reason for that? Because what I just told you, it's a reaction to what they saw that Kissinger is going to give, is forcing them to give everything away, and the Labor Party in Israel is willing to give everything away. That's how they perceive it. Okay? So the formation of this in 74 is of extreme importance for understanding the broad body politic dynamics of the Israeli electorate. A core component of that seaboard that I'm talking about, that will be against withdrawals and against giving back, particularly in the West Bank and all the rest of it, will be the Dati Leumi, the guys with the Kippah Srugah, the Mizrach, the religious Zionists, in whose leadership now, starting in 1974 in the wake of the Yom Kippur War, a bitter struggle for leadership rages between the old and the new. The old guys are willing to give things up. This was the old guard moderates. He died in 70. Shapiro, Dr. Berg, you remember from yesteryear. There was Yitzhak Raphael, and a whole bunch of people that nobody remembers today. And they were the part of the Mafdal, the Mizrahi party, which was always allied with the Labor Party, with Ben Gurion, with Eshkol, with Golda Meir, and they were always, believe it or not, on the security issues to the left, because they never wanted to be in a position of saying, oh, you're causing deaths and trouble and all the rest of it. And so they were always a very moderate one. Dr. Varhoftig, all these people that nobody heard of. Not after the 73 war. Now starts a push to get rid of these guys and replace them with young members of the Mizrahi movement who served in the army, who the Kippah Srugah generation, as they call it, and they have a much more nationalistic and Eretz Yisrael Shlema kind of point of view, and they formed the Gush Amanim. You remember that from yesteryear? Zvulun Hammer and Ben Meir, and they all follow Tzvi Yehuda Cook, and these are the friends of Aryeh over there, and Hanan Parad, all the rest of it, the settlements, and now starts in serious form, quote unquote, the illegal settlements, if you want to call it that, where they just come in, and that's something I'll have to talk about later, and start populating the West Bank in a serious way. This is all reaction to the Yom Kippur War. And it's all reaction to the fact that we don't like the way the National Religious Party has been going as the sort of puppy dog of the Labor Party. You understand? We want things to change. So these are significant developments in the Israeli political history. You might like it. I don't know who I'm looking at. You might dislike it. But the fact is, this is what happened. And they get support. As you can see over here, Menachem Begin goes to sit in with Zvulun and all these other guys when they started in Sebastiev. These are names from yesteryear, and the new, illegal Yishuvim. And here's a guy who's the head of the second largest party in the Knesset, validating them by coming in and sitting with them, so the cameras can all see it and all the rest of it. It's a thunder on the right. It's a new day. I don't want to use the Goldwater example because it's not a good example, but you get what I'm saying when I'm saying you see a reinvigoration of the right-wing dynamic within the Israeli body politic. Once Kissinger pulls off a disengagement in the south, a lot was going on, you see? He turns his attention to the north, to the Syrian front. Here things are tougher because the president of Syria, Hafez Assad, or I should say the dictator of Syria, is no Sadat, and there's very little wiggle room on the Golan Heights. Agreed? When Kissinger goes, as he visits in Damascus, Sadat is a moderate dictator. This guy's a son of a gun. He kills people for breakfast. You know Sadat is. It comes out now. And his son is using poison gas, okay? So these guys imagine what they want out of Israel. And how much room is there to give in on the Golan Heights? The Sinai Desert at the end of the day is pretty big. I'm not saying Israel should give this up or that up, but the truth is they have room. Okay? That's what Moshe Dayan points out. They have room. You got no room with the Golan Heights. Many of us have been there. Probably everybody in this room has been there. You don't have any room. Okay? And for what? Sadat at least is saying, I promise a new day. It's a question whether they believe him or not. He's promising the old day. Okay? What is he saying? Kissinger's diplomacy now obviously has to involve ingenious draftsmanship, correct? It's interesting. And he has a whole staff, very hardworking State Department guys, brainy guys, and they're constantly rewriting, and all the rest of it. This in the old days when you still had the Xerox machines on the airplanes. Significant portions, how did people live before cell phones and computers, Significant portions of the Israeli tzibur are super scared of Syria. I am. They hate Syria, understandably, justifiably. Look at what they tortured the Israeli prisoners I just showed you. And they boast about it, too. And the Israeli tzibur, I'm talking about fears concessions that will leave the Syrian artillery overlooking the Galilee. Who are you trusting, Assad? It is this fear of imminent diplomatic catastrophe that actually launches the Gush Amanim. We have to create a movement in Israel to prevent them from giving away the store, giving away the Golan Heights. It forms, the Gush Amanim forms 3 weeks after Kissinger does the first disengagement agreement with Egypt. So in Egypt, it's January 18th, 1974. The Gush Amanim starts like February 10th or something like that. So you see the timeline. On the other hand, what are you going to do in Syria? The post-war status quo is a mess. The Israeli army is stuck in a bulge near Damascus. You have 1 million Syrian and Iraqi troops around. That doesn't work either. Now, Hafiz Assad has none of the finesse of Anwar Sadat. It's just not who he was. Assad is not really interested in an actual peace, which would leave Israel alone. He wants the destruction of Israel, and he makes no bones about it. Okay? Now, Sadat, look at this. He sent a message through Kissinger, Sadat, to Golda. You may take my word seriously. When I made my initiative in 71, I meant it. When I threatened war, I meant it. When I talk of permanent peace between us, I mean it. We've never had contact, but we now have Kissinger, who we both trust. Let us use him and talk to each other through him, and we will never lose contact with each other. And Golda replied in an appropriate vein. You don't have anything like this coming from Assad. I couldn't kill you this morning, but Mirz Hashem, I'll have good luck at lunch. You understand? That's how it goes. And he doesn't, because he's, as you'll see in a minute, the hero, or he perceives himself as the hero of Arab nationalism. Listen, Hafez Assad is most certainly not changing sides in the Cold War. He is not establishing diplomatic relations with the USA except on the most narrow power politics terms. Assad intends to remain the enemy of the USA as long as it backs Israel. Let's be clear about this. And Assad will cherish his Soviet connections, because why wouldn't he? Okay? So this is a different story than Egypt. Hafez Assad, whose armies were militarily defeated by the IDF in spite of the Syrian surprise, the Syrian SAM-6s, the numerical tank superiority, this same guy demands everything, and he demands it now, including not only a complete withdrawal from the Golan Heights and more, if you know the lines, but a PLO state in the West Bank. In other words, he takes seriously his self-proclaimed role as the new Saladin, the hero of the Arabs against the invaders. They have statues of Saladin. This is when Kissinger goes to the palace, like every foreign visitor, he sits over, like two chairs, like I'm on this bim over here, and above him is a big picture over here of Saladin taking the surrender of the Christians. Like, hint, hint. You understand? And wait a minute, this is even better. In America, you got these Civil War reenactors. You do the Gettysburg again. In Israel now, they got Saladin reenactors. Okay? Did you get a picture here, Howard, of the guy, the other one? They're walking around with heads. Now, they're fake heads, but they're walking around with heads reenacting the Battle of Hattin, you know what I mean? Something like that. This is totally cool. Where'd they come from? These are Israeli Arabs I'm talking about. Because who cares about Gettysburg or Antietam? It's the Battle of Hattin. What's that? That's where the Muslims wiped out the Christians and killed the prisoners. You get it? It doesn't get better than that. So this is a statue that Assad made in Syria, in Damascus, of Saladin. So I'm telling you, they take these, it's a myth, but I'm saying they take these myths very seriously. So how can he, make a deal with Israel that'll leave Israel untouched and all the rest of it? On the other hand, he doesn't have the power. So he's in an interesting place. This is a big challenge to Henry Kissinger, who just gets married during this time. he cut the last string to broilers, okay? Married Nancy McGinnis. Well, he was short, fat, and ugly, so he wanted to marry somebody tall, dark, and handsome, you know? So even if it looks a little bit comical, you know? But what can I tell you? It would be comic if it weren't tragic. But this is who he was, okay? And they didn't show this on the broilers sort of thing, yeah, unfortunately. Kissinger with his new wife, this is the honeymoon. The new wife will shuttle for 34 consecutive days, okay? 34 consecutive days between Damascus and Jerusalem. No Secretary of State has ever done anything remotely similar. I want you to hear what I just said. That's no vacation. It's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and so forth for almost 5 weeks. Okay? It's unbelievable, but he's willing to put the time in. Nixon's out to lunch. He's worried about the Watergate, so you can do what you want. And Kissinger does it. He's in a class by himself. This is something Atchison didn't do, Marshall, you know. It's amazing. And the American public perceives this. So 74 is the year of Kissinger, if you wish. He's increasingly hated by lots of Israelis and American Jews. Raise your hand if you were anti-Kissinger back in 1974, you know, right? There you go. Okay. Now, wait a minute. Which in reality is the best thing he can hope for in terms of giving him credibility in the eyes of the American public, indeed the non-Jewish public around the world. In other words, really, 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 he was saying like this: keep booing me, it helps me with the Arabs. You get it? It's a fascinating paradox. Unless you're a real member of the Middle East, and then you say like this: he wanted the Jews to boo him so that he could able to stick it to the air. It was all part of a plot. You understand? And really, he's a Mossad agent. So all the people that came out, like perhaps some of you did, and were demonstrating every time Kissinger came to Israel. I remember it, right? All the people were on the payroll of the Mossad. So that, you understand? And you think I'm crazy, but you know how the Middle East works. It's like that. So that's what it was. All during this shuttle, as I said before, Nixon is going down, down, down. Do you remember the low moment when he had the run-in with Dan Rather?
I believe we are going to make progress in economic and political deals. Thank you, Mr. President. Dan Rather, the CBS News.
Listen to this.
Are you running for something? Mr. President, are you?
He's smiling. I'd like to kill you. So in other words, Nixon was in a bad, you know that. I mean, he was in a bad spot, going down, down, down. Kissinger starts going up and up. Hafez Assad bargains very hard. As you see, he twisted the knife with Israel. He wouldn't even give him the list of the names of the prisoners. You know, I know this causes anguish to the families that don't know anything. Good. That's what you're dealing with, okay? He's Mamzayim. Anyway, so Golda and Dayan bargained very hard. We're giving Syria nothing. Assad is in a position to make life very difficult for Israel. The Israeli army is still deployed in Syria. Think of the economic cost for Israel in those days. What does it cost to maintain significant forces all the way up there in masses? It's money that Israel never had, and they definitely don't have now. No, it really eats into their pocketbook. In general, as we shall see, the Yom Kippur War wrecked the Israeli economy for at least 2 decades. You know what I said? It wrecked the Israeli economy. That's why poor Pinchas Sapir, that's when he was young, had been building all these little by little over the plans. And as I tried to outline in the boring economics of it, it's not really boring, in all my talks in past years, little by little Israel is making progress. We can debate whether they should have gone a capitalist route or a socialist route and all that sort of thing, where they had better growth, and there's what to debate over there. But they did make growth under Golda. Maybe there was economic growth, it just didn't keep up with the level of spending. That was the problem, but it was growth. After the Yom Kippur War, was no growth. You get it? it goes south. So all the plans that Israel had were really messed up, and that's why you had the crazy, unbelievable inflation later on. Some of us perhaps remember. Today you have the shekel. Remember they used to have the lira? That's gone, right? It went nuts. This is all a result of the Yom Kippur War and the unbelievable price it cost. So Israel's under pressure from Assad. But Assad is under objective pressure in his own country to emerge from the war with some gains, the way Sadat did. See, Sadat, at the end of the day, got some of the Sinai back. That was part of the disengagement agreement. He got something back. So they had the war, have something to show for it. What does Assad have to show for it? Look over here. This is the Golan Heights. This is what Israel got. This is 12 miles by 25 miles, 12 miles by 13 miles. It's not a giant bulge, but it's close to Damascus. So you, doofus, you went to war and you lost more territory. And today, you and I, after all the Syrian civil wars, have a better insight than people did at that time on what's going on in Syria. And Assad in 1974, like the other one today, has to deal with the Sunni Muslims, the Muslim Brotherhood, the extreme Arab nationalists, this group, that group, and the other one, and anything that weakens him and makes him look like a fool can get him killed. Not just lose power, get him killed with the whole family, which wouldn't bother me, but I'm just saying that could happen. So he's under an objective pressure of his own to try to get some kind of deal and we can show for something. As we've seen, during these months after the first disengagement agreement with Egypt, the Gush Emanim arise, and similar right-wing trends began to crystallize in the Israeli body politic. But that's not all. Once the pure shock of the war began to subside after the disengagement agreement, after January, citizens, particularly returning Israeli GIs, began to ask themselves the obvious question: how did Pearl Harbor exactly happen? How come we were surprised? How come nobody did anything? How come we got creamed in the first days? How come we made so many mistakes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Now, what happened in America when you had the Kennedy business? He got assassinated. Who did it? They made a Warren Commission. Because they got the Supreme Court Chief Justice, because after all, that's the most judicial, and tried to do it. Israel made a Warren Commission under the Chief Justice of the Israeli Supreme Court, Shimon Agranat. It's called the Agranat Commission. Shimon Agranat is an interesting guy. Agranat. He's born in Louisville, Kentucky. Right? American boy, graduate of law school from the University of Chicago in the 20s, and then made Aliyah to Palestine in 1930, and that means he had an eminent legal career, and by 1948, he was already in the Supreme Court. So you can't get more Supreme Courty than him. And eventually he becomes the Chief Justice, okay? So he's supposed to head the Israeli Warren Commission, has 140 sessions, okay? Look at this. The commission was an official national commission of inquiry appointed by the government to investigate circumstances leading to the Yom Kippur War. Agranat, the Chief Justice. The other members were Moshe Landau, that would be him, and Nebenzahl, who was a frum guy. His son is the famous Gaon Reb Nebenzahl. Okay, he was the Mavaker Medina. I'm going back. You have to be old Israeli to remember this. He was for many years in Israel. They have an office that you don't have in the United States, but the closest I could come to it would be the Government Accounting Office, something like that, the GAO. So the job of the Mavaker Medina is to roam with your specialists into every government department, see what's wrong, and publish reports. And it's expected the Knesset will do something about it, the government. So, it's sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So it's a nice job. And here's a guy who's from the Poli Aguda, a German Jew. If his son is Rab Nebenzahl, you get an idea what I'm talking about. And he was on the business. And then two former generals, chiefs of staff, Yigal Yadin and Chaim Laskov. 140 sessions, 58 witnesses, started on 21 November 73 to investigate the intelligence information for the days preceding the Yom Kippur War of the enemy moves and intention to launch the war, the evaluation, decisions taken, response thereto, meaning all the screw-ups that I told you about a couple weeks ago, I know for a large part, because it's public info, because of the reports that were published by the Agranat Commission. They investigated and interrogated all these guys, and then they published it. So if you want to know how General Zaira messed up, and how they neglected this piece of information, and that sort of, it's all public record. And also the general deployment of the army in the war, state of readiness during the days preceding the war, operations, meaning what were the mistakes made in a professional way by the army during the war. Here, let's go to the next one. Here they are in session, as you can see. There's the religious guy, Nebenzahl, and there's the head guy, Agranat, and Landau, and Yigal Yadin. And they were taking all this testimony. It wasn't public. It was private sessions. And let's put it this way. They go through the whole business. Like the U.S. Warren Commission, the Agranat Commission gets some things right and gets some things wrong. To this day, there are people who feel that we don't know everything about JFK. Agreed? They might be right, they might be wrong. It might be baloney, not baloney. But the Warren Commission definitely covered things up, and that left a situation in which people will always ask a question, right? By the end of the testimony and deliberations of the Agranat Commission, the unbelievable mess-ups of General Zero that I talked about and the military intelligence were exposed, as were the military errors of General Gonin. And so both men, including their top staff, were fired, right? They were canned. That was the recommendation of the commission, that they should be fired. Also, General Elazar, as the chief of the staff of the army, the commander-in-chief of the army, right or wrong, he said he was crucified, and he died shortly after it in his 40s. It's clearly, it broke him. This is more controversial, because once the war started, he started his best, but that's what they said. Golda Meir was questioned. Dayan was questioned. All the politicians were questioned. What emerged were structural deficiencies in the national security structure along the lines that I described to you. Remember, this one called this one, we didn't have a meeting with this one, and it took 48 hours to get this information over here, and it was just a bunch of foolish errors. Things like the fact that the chief of the Mossad felt he wasn't supposed to give information to Golda of national security importance, but rather to General Zero. The fact that General Zero was able to withhold important information that he got from Ashraf Marwan. Other things revealed a bad decision-making process in terms of chain of command, information sharing. This is the stuff that some of you who work in the government intelligence business know what I'm talking about. The constant and never-ceasing challenge to get the information flow correct to the decision makers in a timely fashion. With all this preventing connecting the dots, as we talked about. Although it came out that although Golda Meir felt that the war was coming, she didn't have what it takes to do an Abraham Lincoln or a Nimitz, and that was her job. Remember, famous Admiral Nimitz said, when you command, you have to command. And if she really felt an attack is coming, she couldn't say, think about what I'm saying. She couldn't say, well, I don't want to override the generals, all the rest of it. You're the prime minister, you asked for the job. And so the buck stops here. If you really feel that this is the right thing to do, you should have done it. Now, it's harsh, but I'll say it again. You wanted the top job. This goes with the pay, right? It's not about cutting ribbons. It's about making the tough decisions. And so I get it as a psychological matter, so do you. But the commission said correctly that this was a problem on your part. She didn't live up to this, correct? Yeah. And, but they whitewashed Golda and Dayan. They said they do not deserve to be fired, okay? They're not told to resign. These generals are, but the big shots, not. So at the end of the day, it's a Mapai business. Get it? That's how the public saw it. At the end of the day, it's old boy network. The public is outraged. This is what happened. The public in Israel was outraged. One guy basically says, like that famous line, that's all I can stand and I can't stand no more. And his name was, he was a Captain Mate Ashkenazi, regular guy, who was a weirdo. I'll tell you what I mean. No, it's a fascinating story. It's more than a movie, as I always say. This guy was a soldier. He did his time. He was a veteran of the 67 war. After the war was over, he was a peacenik in the late 60s. He wanted a PLO state and all that. Then he became involved with the Black Panthers in Israel, even though he's Ashkenazi. But wait a minute, so he's by the Israeli standards, he's a weirdo. Hear me well. He reads the papers. He's an intelligent guy. He reads the international stuff, the national stuff, and he reads in 1972, early 73, Egypt has now announced that they've adopted a new strategic policy, that they're now looking to conquer the whole Sinai Desert. They're going to have a limited war next time. It's going to be covered by the SAM-6 missiles, and the Russians are going to provide them with Sagar. Knows everything that was about to happen. He read in the paper, and he said, wait a minute. Yeah, I'm reading this. Israel's not doing anything about this. He writes letters to the paper, to Mariv and us. He says, how come we're not doing anything about it? That people call him a crank. You understand? They call him a crank. It gets better, or worse. It just so happens his turn comes to serve reserve duty on the bunkers in the Sinai Desert 10 days before the Yom Kippur War. Is this a movie? And he comes there and he says, what the heck? The Egyptians are building like crazy. Doesn't anybody see what I see? No, the colonels, the generals, oh, you're nuts, all the rest of it. And he feels, like it's like a Kafka moment perhaps, the Twilight Zone, like, where am I living? And so he said like this, there's one of two possibilities. When I think one way and the world thinks another way, either I'm crazy or they're crazy. I'm looking here, they're crazy. And so he said, I guess I'm going to do what I can. So for the 10 days or whatever it is, he works feverishly to fix up his bunker, bring in the ammunition, because everything was in a sloppy state. So bring in the ammunition, the food, fix the minefields, the barbed wire, reinforce this, all the stuff that you need to do that nobody else was doing it. His bunker was called Fort Budapest. It's not Hungary. It's the name that the Israelis gave to the fort. This is surreal, as I said before. And so, he does what he can. As a result, his is the only bunker that is not conquered in the Egyptian war, in the Yom Kippur War. They hold out to the end. They fight a dramatic battle. Again, I keep saying it over and over again because I don't know how else to say it. You could make a bunch of movies out of this. It's the only one in the Bar-Lev line, in spite of the fact that the Egyptians launched repeated, desperate assaults and ferocious bombardment for days and days and days. We're talking, 20-some days? Something like that? And they didn't take the bunker. Now, this shows you if the others had done it, they wouldn't take them either. Okay? But that's what happened. So he's a weird guy, or maybe he's normal and everybody else is weird. Or the third possibility, they're both weird. Right? Now, when he's demobilized in February 74, Mati Ashkenazi is understandably sensitive to the criminal negligence of the high command. How come I saw this a year ago and nobody else did? And he is outraged that Golda Meir and Dayan have been reelected and are acting as if nothing had happened in terms of their personal responsibility. How come the generals got fired, as he says, you see in this picture, and Dayan not? And he goes to Dayan, and Dayan says, well, I was reelected, so ha 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 on you. So that just really, steams him up. He begins a one-man demonstration opposite the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem. We've all been there. If you've been Rechavi, there's always some group demonstrating, aren't there, with signs, I'm talking about, across the street from the conservative and all that. So he demands, so he's got a one-man sign, which basically says, I demand the resignation of Golda and Dayan, and I demand that they admit responsibility for the disaster. Now, for a few days, it's eccentricity. Like I say, you got this all the time over there. We always see this in Rechavi, right? But within a short while, more and more demobilized soldiers show up. And then dozens. And then hundreds. And then thousands. Yes. And particularly after comes out the Agranat Commission whitewashed Golda Meir, which is published on April Fool's Day. I kid you not, 1 week before Pesach. So the war was in the Sukkot time, and now it's a week before Pesach. And what they say in Israel, they say, things aren't happening the way this is not right. It can't be that Dayan is still the defense minister after he messed everything up and never even said a word that I'm sorry I messed up. And that Golda Meir sings on as if nothing happens. Look at the crowds. Okay? Look at the crowd. And Dayan is a phony, it really builds up. In the United States, this is called democracy. You understand? That's what we're talking about. Nobody's rioting. I want to be clear about this. There's no violence, right? It's a demonstration. They didn't block the traffic. You see? What they say is we're citizens and we are protesting what we think stinks in the political situation. I want to be clear about this. Here, let's go to this. Look at it forms all over the place. Kol Kavla Sahal, and then, enough of the wars. And then this guy's talking for a second about, how they try to... There's a Mati Ashkenazi addressing the crowd. It's getting bigger and bigger every day, you see? And from Budapest to here, enough with the... Golda Meir should resign because of the mechtal, because of the disaster, as they say over here. And this guy is describing a Hebrew what happened, and here his mother Ashkenaz is talking to the press. See, built up steam. That's what I'm trying to say. I repeat, they call this democracy. Now, Israel has a different system in the United States because the president's there for 4 years, one way or the other. But in a parliamentary system, you can fall tomorrow. That's a huge difference. You cannot get rid of a president except under the most unusual circumstances. That's the way the Constitution was written. And all I can tell you is this was a shock to Golda Meir and to Dayan. They were used to be popular and charismatic. As you saw when she went among the soldiers, they were all over her, right? And turns out all these big politicians are not thick-skinned the way some politicians might be. You understand? Okay? As I say, America's just a different system. Okay? It's just a different system. And, it got to them. All I can tell you is it got to them. Whew. All of this is happening as Kissinger shuttles tirelessly between Jerusalem and Damascus. It's quite a spring, quite a Pesach season, right? It boils down to this. Both sides, Israel and Syria, really hate each other. Syria will not make peace, no question about that. And Syria intends to activate the United Nations and the Third World unless President Assad has something to show for his efforts. If he does not recover an inch of the Golan Heights, his position, as I told you, will be untenable, as he's prepared to pull down the temple like Shimshon, right? So I'll make another war, or the UN will fall apart, or they'll condemn America, or we'll jack up the oil price again. Something. I'm desperate, okay? Golda Meir says, good, to hell with him. Kissinger says, no, you got to give him something. Let me explain to you why. And he does explain why. And Kissinger says, anyway, give him a sop. Give him a little nothing. It's a symbol. He has to get something back. Meaning, it can't be that Israel simply withdraws from the territory they just conquered in the Yom Kippur War. He has to be able to say, I got something back from my fights. So it boils down, after Kissinger's staff looks at the map, Quneitra. Quneitra is a small town 3 miles from the old border. You understand? In other words, when Israel captured the Golan Heights in 1967, so at the end of the Golan Heights, close to the Israeli new border, within the territory that the IDF captured was a town called Quneitra, about 3 miles, to be perfectly honest, 1.5 miles away from the border. And so give him that. In other words, and he'll say he got something back, and then at least we'll get a disengagement agreement. It's less than 2 miles from the border, and it's garnished, but it's a symbol for Assad. Golda Meir blows up, as she did with Kissinger. She says, chutzpah, look what she said. If you strangle me, I don't know. This is what she says to Kissinger. If you strangle me, I don't know how to go to the people and explain to them that after all, and then she's talking stream of conscience, never mind, there was a war, there was another war, more dead, more wounded, and we have to give up territory to Syria? Why? Because Assad said it's his territory? I can never accept that there's no difference between the attacker and the attacked. He should suffer because he was the aggressor, you understand? I can't accept that. It's not Menachem Begin who scares us, it's not Sharon who scares me, it's me, myself. I can't make peace with the idea that we have 2 wars in 7 years, the price we pay for it, and then Assad says he has to get his territory back. That's a chutzpah to the nth degree. How is this possible? Isn't it encouraging for our neighbors to go and fighting when the fighting doesn't lose anything? So she's venting. And in the end, whatever you say, you got to do something. And so that's what happens. In the end, Israel yields Quneitra with a small part of the Golan Heights. So basically, Israel ends up keeping 96%, 97%, something like that, of the Golan Heights. And once again, I'm standing in front of you today in the beginning of year 2018. In hindsight, it was the right move. Because what did Israel get? Under the old Assad, they got 30 years, or 20 until he died, 28 years or something like that apiece on the Golan Heights. It's interesting what I'm saying. Israel has trouble for the Gaza, and they have trouble with the Hezbollah. Under Assad, they didn't have trouble from the Syria. Syria was always waiting, pouncing, ready to go if the opportunity presents itself. We're not talking about lambs over here, anything like sheep. But there was no terrorism or that. It's just interesting. So they had a quiet border, as many of us know, because we've been many times, haven't we, on the Golan Heights when you go on a tour. And it's a little scary when Syria's there, but it's no shooting, you see? And even under the younger Assad, which is a more complex situation, it didn't really, it didn't really develop into a war the way he's describing over here, although that's more complex. But basically, so it depends how you define success. But this is what Israel did in the end. And as a result, they were able to sign, and everybody's happy. And Golda Meir says her famous line to Kissinger's, "Now I see," because he hugs her and kisses her. And he says, "I see you kiss women too." What he means is he was going to every Arab capital, and in the Arab capitals, you go kiss the Saudi Arabia, kiss this. In Israel, it's like Oy Gevalt. He's in Algeria today. He's kissing him. Oy Gevalt. Tomorrow he's in Morocco. He's kissing him today. So finally, he comes to Israel. Take a look at this.
This is a day that we hope will be a day that will not only bring immediate quiet on our northern borders, and that Syrian mothers, Israeli mothers, Syrian young wives, Israeli young wives, children on both sides of the border can go to sleep at night without terror, dreams of who knows if their dear one is alive today, will he be alive again on the next day? This is what we hope for our people and for our neighbors.
So,
in this country, which has suffered so much, and of the people that have suffered so much, no gift could be greater than the possibility of a true and lasting peace. On behalf of all of my colleagues, I know that our deepest wishes that what has been done in this past month will speak today when a lasting peace comes. And as the Prime Minister so eloquently said, when children on both sides of the frontier can live in security, when mothers do not have to worry about their sons, and when everybody can turn their energies to tasks of construction.
I never thought you would kiss a woman.
okay. Anyway, so that was an achievement. It was. And finally, Israel got the POWs back. You look, Golda Meir is crying. Look at this.
310 השבויים הישראלים החלו לחזור הביתה בחודשים הראשונים שלאחר המלחמה.
This is why you make peace. This is the last hurrah of her government. After that, Golda Meir the next day resigned, and Diana under pressure of the demonstrators. She was out of politics. So the question becomes then, who's next? And I'm at the end. I'll just give a few of the basic details. Who's next? Pinchas Sapir was the last of the old guard, the old Mapai Tammany Hall. You understand? And he controls the party machinery. Everybody who has a job owes it to Sapir. So he can have the job if he wants, no question about it. The Central Committee of the Marach, they'll vote for him. But he's old, he's 68, and he's dying. And he's aware of his non-charisma in the telegenic sense. This is the, you saw what he was like when he was young, and he wasn't a picture postcard. He wasn't that type, right? It's an interesting guy. Sapir had a lot of power and lived in a small apartment. He was from that old school. You get it? He had a little house in the Kfar Saba, and he had his apartment in Yerushalayim, and he shared it with another guy. It's a whole long story. There were those types still left over. He's an old school throwback to the Ben Gurion Eshkol era, with all the pluses that I mean by that, and all the minuses. Okay? And the times now, it's the 1970s afterward, the times do not call for such an individual. Okay? So instead, he gets to be the kingmaker, because he controls the machinery. and you have all the Barracudas all want the job, okay? Because once Golda's out of the way, they say, oh, isn't it a shame? Now I want it, okay? And so who will be chosen? Will it be Yigal Alon, Shimon Peres, Yitzhak Rabin, or Abba Ibn? And each one says, Kula Shali, naturally. Each one has ambitions. Abba Ibn says, I guess I've been the eloquent, it's like the Three Little Piggies or something like that. He says, I've been the one who was the most moderate and farsighted, and I can speak English well, and all the rest. And Yigal Alon, each one had a claim, and they did have claims. Okay, and each one could not win because Iban took himself very seriously, but nobody else did. You understand? The famous story in Israel. I like this. Famous story in Israel goes like this. When they kidnapped Eichmann, so what did they do? They had to kidnap him in Buenos Aires and then put him in a plane back to Israel. How you going to get him plane back to Israel? The answer is they waited till Argentinian Independence Day, and then Abba Ibn with the foreign ministry comes in a plane and to participate, and then when he flies out, they put Eichmann with the kidnap went back on the plane. So he used to say, and that's what they did. So in Israel, they say like this. Why'd they do it that way? The answer was they wanted to be completely not suspicious. There's only one guy in Israel who would have no questions why a whole plane is just for him. You understand? So he was as they say, he's a giant in his own mind, but so he wasn't going anywhere. It was a rude awakening. Shimon Peres is a very capable person. Very capable indeed, but now you have the fact that you have all the Tammany Hall politics. He backed Ben-Gurion back in 1965 when the Rafi broke off from the Mapai and they had the elections against Ben-Gurion, against Eshkol, and now comes the time to pay you back. Okay? And Yigal Alon was too old, as they saw, and he was actually a very decent person, and decent people lose out in these kinds of things. Although he had been the officer, I'm not going to go too much into this, time's late. So the bottom line is it was Yitzhak Rabin, as you and I know. He's the one that gets chosen by Sapir to be the next prime minister. He's got the right image. He's not associated with the Mechtal, the Yom Kippur War, and he is associated with the 6-Day War. So he was in charge of the word everybody wants to remember, and he wasn't associated with the word everybody now wants to forget. Okay? Now comes, of course, the real soap opera. As I told you before, Peres was denied. He ran for it, but he lost because they want to get him back for the old scores. Peres, therefore, is going to be frustrated beyond belief. Because on the basis of pure ability, I also agree with this. Peres was the best one. If you take all around, you understand? You can like him, dislike him. There are a lot of things I didn't like about Shimon Peres, a lot of policy, but if you want, man for man, he was a very capable person. And now to lose it because of something, as he sees, as stupid as this. So Peres gets number 2, he gets to be defense minister. He gets Moshe Dayan's job, and he actually was a very good one. Okay? He reformed the Israeli army from the disasters of the Yom Kippur War. I don't know if I'll get to that this year. Abba Ibn, as we saw, was canned in favor alone. It's the end of Abba Ibn. The guy was like 60. He thought it's a temporary business, but you and I know the Labor Party was not coming back. By the time they come back into power, it's 1992. He's 80. So it passed him by. If he would have agreed to serve with Begin, Menachem Begin would love him because of the speech. But he wouldn't do that. And so it's the end of Abba Ibn. So he goes through a terrible, frustrating period. Yigal Alon will be the foreign minister. He'll be shockingly mistreated by Yitzhak Rabin, who definitely has personality disorders, and I don't mean it in a funny way. Yitzhak Rabin, you may possibly recall, was number 2 in the 48 war under Alon. Yigal Alon was the commander of the Palmach and later the best commander of the Israeli army. And look at this. Yitzhak Rabin was 23 years old when he was number 2, chief of staff under Alon. Very young, obviously. And sometimes you have a certain Oedipus complex, you understand what I'm saying? And he will be very rude, and let's put it, he'll make the next 2 years when Alon is the foreign minister, I'm talking about personally now, into a living nightmare, which is very interesting. I say that's a personality disorder. And Rabin did have, I know it sounds funny when I say, but I mean it, he did have these personality disorders. Like all of us, most of us probably have, but if you're successful, you work around it. So he obviously worked around it. we'll see. He was able to get along fine with Nixon, which is interesting, but not with Ford, and not with Carter, and not with the others. It's a funny chemistry type of a situation in a way that Golda does. Whew, it's too late, so let's call it over here. Good night.